This is Philosophy 101. Every 1 year is for Philosophy 101, right? My name is Jan Mikhailov. I will be teaching this course. And Philosophy 101 is Introduction to Philosophy. So it is general philosophy. It really is what people think about when they say philosophy. Unlike many other philosophy courses like Philosophy 102, I don't know if any of you took Philosophy 102, but if you did, that's not exactly the same thing. We will go over syllabus today. We will talk about philosophy in general a little bit, just to give you an idea. And then where did it begin? Where did philosophy begin? How did it begin? Because we'll be going historically from the very beginning and all the way into modern time. Okay, so this is an introduction to the discipline of philosophy as it unfolded in Western civilization from the time of the ancient Greeks to the modern era. I do talk about Western philosophy. Of course, there are classes on philosophy of the East and so on. If you are curious, you can take them too. But for our purposes, I mean, United States is a Western country, right? So Western philosophy had the most influence on the way we think. And for this reason, this course is a more traditional course dedicated to Western philosophy. We'll go through the key thinkers and movements who had the most contribution. We can't possibly cover everything, especially in an introductory course, but we will cover the most important figures. Okay, one more thing before we get into the material. Lines of communication. What's the best way to communicate with me outside of the classroom? Obviously, if you are in the classroom, it's easier. Send me a message on Web Campus. That is the best way. It's not great to send emails because sometimes I get emails from students and I don't even know which class they're taking. And believe it or not, I teach more than one class. They have different due dates, different requirements. They're even on different subjects. So if you're asking me when's the next exam, outside of context, I'm like, well, which class are you taking, right? And if you do it through Web Campus, I immediately can see which class, which section, so I know who you are. And it's easier for me in general to communicate with students this way. It doesn't go into the wrong folder. I always check that. I try to answer the questions as soon as I can. Not always instantly, obviously. I could be sleeping or doing something else. But if I have time, I'll answer it, even if it's Sunday or whatever. I don't care. Now, if you, the best way for you to get messages is also to make sure you are your Web Campus Messenger sends you notifications, push notifications, and I would even make sure it redirects them into your regular email account, like Gmail or something. Because I may send you some important reminders or some important information, and you do want to get it on time, right? You don't want to see it 1 week later, and then it's too late for something. So the best way is to always get notifications. Check it. If there's nothing you didn't know, it's fine, but there may always be something you didn't know. OK, now let's talk about the outline of the grade. This is on the syllabus. Syllabus can be downloaded from Web Campus at any moment. But just in case you didn't download it or didn't look at it, here is the outline of the grade. We will have 2 online midterms. This is fairly easy online exams, 100 points each, 10% of the grade. There will be, the first exam will be in person now, and the final will be in person. I will say more about them later. The midterm, the first in-person midterm is 200 points, or 20% of the grade. And the final is 300 points, or 30% of the grade. Right, so a fairly big chunk of the grade, plus it will be cumulative on the entire material. They're not really that difficult, and I'll explain to you how to prepare for them. So don't worry too much about the exams. It's not like math class, right? They are not super complicated. Then there will be course paper. Even though with all the AI battles, it's kind of difficult now to even assign the course papers. But it's a philosophy class. It really, if you major in philosophy, you'll see it's all about writing papers. You read in material, you write in papers. So there has to be at least one paper. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be a decent philosophy course. So I can just beg you pretty much not to use AI for this, because it defeats the purpose, right? The purpose is to learn the material, to learn how to write those papers. You're definitely going to need to do it at some point in your life, and you want to be able to do it. Regardless of whether you major in philosophy or not, the very skill of reading some primary materials and writing based on those primary materials is something which is very useful. And unfortunately now with AI, students are losing it completely. So it's a shame, right? And of course for us too, it's kind of ridiculous to grade AI, because if the student didn't write it, but it's AI generated, and I'm wasting my time leaving feedback for AI, that's just waste of my time. So please don't do it. I will check it for AI, but obviously, like, I know that now AI is very smart and students still find a way around it. So please don't. Just please don't. Write the paper nice and fair. Do your best on it. It's 200 points at 20% of the grade. We will do it in the end of class. You'll see on the syllabus the date. Then attendance and participation. That actually is a very important part of the class, even though it's not a huge chunk of the grade. I only dedicate 100 points to it, but I do, because this is probably the most valuable thing we can do for you to come to class and discuss these issues. We'll have discussions throughout. I always interrupt the flow of the lecture to discuss certain important questions. And philosophy is all about arguing over issues, thinking over issues. So that is another essential part of philosophy. And for this reason, if somebody is not attending and not participating in this, their grade is not going to be perfect. So I will be taking attendance periodically. I'm not going to do it every single time, but I'll explain to you about attendance later. However, I will be taking it, and students who are missing classes will have this part of the grade either reduced or completely eliminated. In other words, they're not going to get this 100 points, and at that case, they will never get an A in this class, because, as you know, that's 10% of the grade, so that will automatically reduce it to 90%. Okay, what else? The exams are multiple choice. The ones online are limited to 45 minutes. The final, we can do more than 45 minutes, but typically students are done very quickly. 45 minutes is way too much, really. There's 25 questions, they're multiple choice. And actually, at the beginning of each class, I'll do mini reviews. We'll talk about some questions, review questions, which some of them will be on the exam, and I will even tell you the exact answers. But it will always be at the beginning of the class. So if you miss it, you're going to miss this part. I'm not going to tell you answers anymore specifically other than at the beginning of class, but I will send you the review list of questions before the exam, so you could check, make sure you have all of them. Okay, now the book for this course, Lochhead Voyage of Discovery, A Historical Introduction to Philosophy. It's a great book. I don't really demand that you have it. Nowadays, not everybody has money to buy these books. So everything you need for the exams, I will give you in the lectures. But it will help. It has a lot more detail. Obviously, I cannot possibly, in the classroom, give you as much detail about everything as the book does. And many of the things in the book we won't even cover, because it is very substantial. But it is a great book, and it will be great help if you actually get it. I do advise you to read the appropriate chapters before class. If you can get an electronic copy or something, there's probably something online anyway. Just Google it, see if you can find it. Right now, Amazon has it at $74. Maybe prices fluctuate. Sometimes it's cheaper, sometimes more expensive. Looks like ebook can be borrowed for $44. I don't know what CSN bookstore, if anybody checked how much is it there, but I'm guessing something like that too, which generally is a lot for a book. But you know that school books, typically they charge more for them. Okay, this is the outline from the syllabus. I try to stick to it. Sometimes I have to make changes, depends on things outside of my control, but I try not to. So this is all the days we meet, right here. including the Labor Day when we do not meet. That will be September 7th. And the exam dates are here, right? So these two are online exams, but we're actually not going to meet on that day. This is kind of like exam day for you to do the exam, but I don't see any point gathering you in a classroom to take online exam. So you can do it at home if you want. The first one will be September 21st, the final, probably December 9th. They do announce the specific dates depending on the schedule, right? Because CSN actually shifts the dates for the final week. I don't know if you're aware of that, but because they give 2 hours to each class to take the exam, typically for this time slot on Mondays and Wednesdays, the exam's on Wednesday, which will be December 9th. But I think they will put it officially later on. And other than that, this is what we're going to be covering, starting from today, Introduction to Philosophy, and then going through Greek philosophy, which is at the foundation, and then medieval philosophy, and then early modern philosophy, and finally ending with 19th century, which is the most interesting, I guess, part of philosophy, existentialism, all that cool stuff. And course paper will be due here on November 30th at the end of course. Now, let's talk a little bit about philosophy. What exactly is philosophy? That comes from Greek language, because the Greeks were the first at the foundation of at least Western philosophy, and we still use a lot of Greek words, and this is a Greek word. Philia in Greek means love, and Sophia means wisdom. Love of wisdom. That's precisely what philosophy is, but it is not exactly what most people think of philosophy. If you ask somebody who never had any training in philosophy, they would imagine somebody, I don't know, smoking pot and just wondering about some weird stuff. But that's not really what it is, as you will see already today, because philosophy really began when people started doing it rationally and systematically. That's exactly why logic originated with philosophy. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but logic is a branch of philosophy. As I will say in a few minutes, Philosophy 102, which is required for many majors at UNLV, is actually logic, and it is part of philosophy. Then it migrated into mathematics, and then it migrated into computer science. Computers operate on logic, but it started with philosophy. In fact, all science started with philosophy. There was no separate science for many centuries. There was theology, which is the study of religious issues, and there was philosophy. When you engage in philosophical thinking, you are using your reason to better understand yourself and the world around you. So let's talk a little bit about philosophy in general. There are several main branches: epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, logic, and there are several smaller ones. But this is the main ones. Epistemology is the theory of truth and knowledge. Metaphysics, theory of existence and reality. Ethics is a theory of virtue and morality, and logic is a theory of reason and argumentation. So let's take a look at all of them and understand what kind of questions they are dealing with. Starting with epistemology. Like I said, it's a theory of truth and knowledge. It asks questions such as, what is truth? On the surface of it, it seems like everybody understands it, right? What is truth? That's easy, but is it? What is truth? What do you guys think? Let me ask you now. Yeah?
What someone believes is right.
What does it mean for somebody is believed to be right?
It follows their moral guidelines.
Moral guidelines?
Like they feel that it's right.
So as long as they feel that it's right, it's true. There may be a problem here, right? Yeah. Okay, facts by themselves can facts by themselves be true? Or is it our statements about facts? Yeah.
Kind of logic backed up by like what you feel is right, like what he was saying, like just kind of like, emotion and also, reason.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. There's actually several different theories of what truth is. And they are something we will talk about more in this class. This is the questions people started asking, the first philosophers started asking. And of course, while it seems easy, you can see it actually is not. It's not at all. Then there's a question of what is knowledge? What does it mean to say I know something? Like if I tell you, I know that there's 10 students in a classroom next to ours. Do I know it? What is required for me to know it? Yeah.
Maybe to see it, feel it, hear it, to have engaged like your five senses into, like I can see that chair and I can tell you that red chair is there. So I know that for a fact, and I assume because we're all human and have commonality that you can also see that chair.
Okay, do you see the students in another classroom now?
No.
No, you didn't see them either.
Yeah.
Is there any way for you to know how many students are there?
Go over to the classroom and look.
Well, that's the best way, right? You can go over and look. But is there any other way? If I wanted to know how many students are there, do I have to go there? Could I ask one of you guys? Could I ask you, for example, and say, could you please go, count the students, come back and tell me? And you come back and you tell me there are 10. Do I know it now? Well, according to philosophy, actually, well, the most popular theory in philosophy is knowledge is justified true belief. So there's two requirements here. It has to be justified and it has to be true. So my justification could be I saw it with my own eyes. That's the best one. But it could also be one of the students saw it with their own eyes and told me. Right? And at that point, the issue may come up. Should I trust this student? Is he trustworthy? Would he be telling me the truth? Does he have a motive to lie to me? Because amazingly enough, believe it or not, most of the things we know from other people. Right? How many things have you seen with your own eyes? Have you been to the moon? No? Then how do you know it's not a chunk of cheese? Other people told you, right? They've been there even. They took pictures, they studied it, and they told you it's a planet. Obviously, centuries ago, people weren't so sure. Some of them actually thought it was a hole, as we will see, because they couldn't go there. Nobody went there. So if you look at it, I don't know, it's like a very shiny circle. What is it? Now we know. Now when you are like 2 or 3 years old, your parents already tell you what it is. And other people tell you, and you never even question it. But it's not as easy as it may seem. So the other question now, is it true? Because in order for it to be knowledge, it has to be true. So outside of the fact that student could lie to me, student could come back and tell me there are 10 when in fact there are 11 for personal reasons. We can even come up with some explanation why somebody may be motivated to do it this way. But other than that, what else could go wrong? Could something go wrong? Yeah.
Could miss a person. Someone else could walk in there after they counted.
Exactly. It could change. Things change. He counted them. There were 10. By the time he made it to our classroom and told me, somebody walked in or somebody left. Now there is either 9 or 11. Right? So even though he honestly tells me the truth just changed. It's no longer the case that there are 10 students. So things like this are important, and this is what epistemology studies. And many, in fact, most known philosophers had some theories on epistemology, although not every one of them. Some are more into epistemological issues, some are less. But this is a branch of philosophy, right? Okay, now let's look at metaphysics. This is probably what most people think about when they say philosophy. Metaphysics is a theory of existence and reality. Why does something exist instead of nothing? What do you think? Why? Now, if you're a religious person, you have a simple answer, right? If you're a Christian, why does something exist instead of nothing? God created it. End of story, period. But not everybody is religious. Not everybody is Christian, right? And even back in ancient Greece, at the time Christianity didn't even exist, right? People were questioning it. They were like, why? Why are we all here? What are we doing here? This is the most philosophical question. We are alive, we're going to work every day, we're doing things. Why? Is there any reason? Is there any meaning in all of this? Or are we just wasting our time until we finally die? And that is metaphysical question. Another metaphysical question, what is the fundamental and underlying nature of reality? Some of the very first philosophers were wondering about that. And you may say, hey, it's easy, right? Physics tells us. Note that actually metaphysics is something which is related to physics. It just kind of goes deeper into this because, well, does physics answer this question? Do we have some sort of a question about what is underlying nature of reality from physics? Did you take physics? What does it say on the subject? No, but as a fundamental, like what is everything made of? Everything is not made of Big Bang, right? Big Bang has something, atoms. And we will see, like actually on Wednesday, atomos is a Greek word. It's a Greek theory. Democritus came up with it, that everything is made up of little indivisible chunks. Atomos means indivisible in Greek. And it's a beautiful theory, but are they indivisible? Can we divide atom? Yeah, as it turned out, fairly recently actually, we divided it. We split the atom. That's what thermonuclear reaction is. And turned out there's a bunch of stuff out there. What's inside the atom? There's a nucleus, right? And there are electrons which are circling, well, not exactly circling, going around the nucleus. And the nucleus itself is also consists of protons and neutrons. Okay, is this the final little chunk? Can you divide them further? Yes. The proton and neutrons you can divide into quarks. Right? The physics that did find out. Electrons and quarks, well, there is a theory that they can also be, there's something inside of them. Let's put it this way. What is the theory? What is this theory called? String theory, exactly. A string theory, strings. There are strings inside of them, but this has not been proven with experiments yet, because we're talking about such a teeny tiny quantities that is almost impossible to prove. They built a ginormous collider in Switzerland, which is like many miles long. They are constantly running experiments for dozens of years now, trying to prove this theory either right or wrong. They couldn't. Mathematically, it makes sense. Mathematically, it does make sense, although there are also disagreements about what exactly are those strings, how does it work. But nonetheless, we will not go too far into the physics, but staying with philosophy. What's the next question we might ask after that? What do you think? Do you see the pattern here? Exactly. What are strings made of? Is this the end? Can we split the string? Is there something inside? And that is a philosophical issue. Like, we may never know, but do we have a right to at least ask these questions? Yes, that's how physics began. That's what first people, like, they were living in caves or whatever, nobody cared. And then there were certain people who started to care, who were like, well, what is everything made of? Stop it, just let's go hunt. We need some bison for the dinner. No, I want to know. And that's why today we have computers and all this amazing stuff, because we didn't just go and hunt the bison. We started wondering about that. So that's philosophy. And that is metaphysics. Then ethics. Ethics is a question of virtue and morality. Very important. Maybe the most important. In fact, Stoics thought that was the most important for a human being. What actions are right or wrong? are some actions inherently right or wrong, or are actions right or wrong based on their consequences, right? Because, well, again, if you're religious, what is the answer? How do you know if actions are right or wrong?
If there's sins or not?
Read the Bible. There are commandments. End of story. If you don't do what God told you to do, you'll be punished. But what if you're not religious? Is it okay to do anything then? Should you be allowed to kill somebody? I mean, if there is no eternal punishment and you can get away with it, let's say you can get away with it, is it okay to do it? Well, this is where consequences come in, right? At least in a civilized country, you'll probably go to jail, most likely. But let's say you can get away with it and there is no God. Is it okay to kill them? Or is there still something there which should stop you? Perhaps your psychology or something, right? The way you will see the world after you've done that. So that is another important part of philosophy. And again, most philosophers did have something to say about that. And then there is logic. Logic is actually just the way we ask those questions, that they cannot be asked and answered randomly. There is a process, and turns out that actually is the way, in general, our mind works. Our mind has certain rules which we have to follow in order to get to a particular result. And this is what, simply put, is logic. Right? There's formal and informal logic. We go deeper into it in Philosophy 102. We're not going to go very deeply here, but we'll talk about it at least somewhat when we talk about Aristotle, because he was a originator of logic. People did use logic before Aristotle, but they did not systematize it. They did not approach it as a science. He was the first one who actually wrote books on it, who actually put it as a system, worked out certain rules, and they are still with us today. If you take logic today, at least half of it comes still from Aristotle, whatever he did back in the day. We did develop it further, but nonetheless, the core is still Aristotelian. And there are specialized branches of philosophy. There's philosophy of mind, there's philosophy of language, there's philosophy of law, and so on. If you have a major in philosophy, you will actually have to take classes in, if not all of them, then many of them. And UNLV does have classes in philosophy of law and political philosophy and so on. But if you don't major in philosophy, you don't need to take specialized classes. However, you obviously still have to at least get some idea from this course what they are. What is political philosophy, for example? How is it different from philosophy of law? And so on. So we'll be touching on all those subjects because they are important. Okay, and we will be doing it. There's actually two ways to study philosophy. One of them is by this subject, right? We could start with epistemology and then just talk about what different philosophers thought on subject of epistemology, then move on to metaphysics. But that's not how I do it. I actually believe in a historical approach. I think that these ideas are closely connected to the times when they were happening, so we'll be doing it historically. We'll start from the beginning and go all the way towards our time. Why? Well, ideas, like I said, I certainly believe they are connected to the times and places. What is happening in the world in any particular time period affects the way people think about it, and vice versa. When people think about something, they affect historical events, they affect the flow of history. So there's a close connection, and I always say at least a few words about philosophers themselves, their personal life, their personal history, so you could get some idea about them before we talk about their ideas. So that's how we're going to be going, starting from the ancient period. We will cover bulk of it next time on Wednesday, but we still have to, well, actually, ancient period we'll cover more than just Wednesday, but today and Wednesday we'll talk about so-called pre-Socratic philosophy, before Socrates. We'll see Socrates on Monday, but before then we need to say a few words about what was happening before Socrates. And there was a lot of interesting stuff. Okay, so ancient period. Like I said, it originated in Greece. Now, Greece, of course, is still a country. If you look at the map, you will find it today. It is in European Union. It's in Europe. This is roughly what Greece is today. Actually, back then, when the whole thing began, Greece was not a determinate country. There was no a country of Greece. There were Greek people, Hellenic people, and they lived all around the area. Actually, some of the most important parts were for philosophy before Socrates were not in Greece itself. They were here in Lydia. And today, this is actually Turkey. But back then, it was populated by Hellenic people. One thing they had in common is the language. The language was pretty much the same, so that's how you can group them. Other than that, they had different laws, different customs, there were different communities, and they didn't have one big state which would kind of summarize all that. Nonetheless, this is where it all began. They were traveling outside of their area too, but this is the main area where everything was happening. Athens, of course, we'll talk about Athens mainly next week. Why Greece? Well, this is, like I said, where philosophy really began. Greeks created intellectual foundations of Western heritage. Many things which they have discovered are still with us today. In science, we use lots of Greek words, the word physics itself, the words geography, and so on. They are Greek words. There is so much Greek heritage, it's amazing. And they asked some basic questions about human life that still dominate our own intellectual pursuits. What is the nature of the universe? What is the purpose of human existence? What are relationship to divine forces? In fact, to us, today it's a little bit easier to understand the Greeks because, like I said, they were before Christianity, and their approach to religion was roughly similar to the way people think about religion today, at least many people. And the Greeks not only provided answers, but developed a system of how you're supposed to do it, logical, analytical system of approaching these questions. Rational outlook remained an important feature of Western civilization all throughout today. We're still using it, and so that is why it is important to understand it. Now, it started with poetry. The first figures which were important in Greece and which laid the foundation for future philosophy were actually poets. It's not philosophy yet, although it's debatable what exactly is philosophy, but traditionally poets are not considered philosophers. Nonetheless, they tried to do the same thing. They tried to provide answers to all those questions. Cosmological, first of all, questions, origin, structure, workings of the universe, and they preserved and passed on this knowledge from generation to generation. Why do you think poetry? Why not prose? What's special about poetry which, yeah?
Since I feel like poetry calls out society, like it talks about generally how the world is and tries to make it like sound beautiful.
No, yeah, but that's why, like, it talks about it is the first thing there. If you want to talk about society, why would you do it through poetry? Because you can do it through other ways. Then once you decided to do it as poetry, then yeah, it starts talking about it. Yeah.
Maybe because poetry is a story and you can attempt to answer questions about your world through a story or through maybe what you would consider fiction.
But you can do it without rhyming words.
Yeah.
However, what makes it, yeah.
I think it's because it's simplistic and memorable, so it'll last long.
It's easier to remember. Yeah. Like imagine this if it's a long story. The paper, they didn't have paper. They had papyrus, which was very expensive. So if you want to pass on certain information, the best way is to rhyme it, to make it easy to remember. And then you can tell it to other people, and they tell it to other people, and tell it to other people. You don't need anything other than your mouth. But if you are doing it in some other form, yeah, you can still kind of remember and pass it on, but you'll be transforming it quite a bit. It will be difficult to preserve it in exactly the same way. As actually we now know, they did it even to poetry. Even poetry was somewhat transformed. But at least it made it easier for them. So poets served also important religious function, because the stories of the gods were transmitted through poets, and they served ethical function. People would learn how to behave, what is important in life, when they listened to those poems. For the most part, those were myths. What do you think about when you hear the word myth today? Yeah. Yeah, fantasy, right? Something made up. Well, actually, the word mythos in Greek just meant the story. It didn't have this connotation. Later on, they came up with another word, logos, which was more of a rational story. But mythos was just a story, and that's how they looked at it. However, to us, it seems more of a fantasy, because indeed they were like fantasy, but that's their way to explain things. They were trying to explain it in more familiar ways. Certain things are just, they didn't have any better way to talk about them, like why the lightning happens, right? Today we can go into electricity. Well, they didn't know any about that, but can you still explain it? Well, yeah, you can come up with something, like the god was angry and threw the lightning bolt. That's the explanation. So this is how myths started, and of course the poetry, the first Greek poetry, was filled with that. And regarding the Greek gods, I don't know if you guys know about it, they had many gods. It was not like a monotheistic religion like Christianity or Islam. Many different gods. Those gods were very anthropomorphic. They were like humans, kind of like powerful humans, in a sense that they were not all good. They were sometimes naughty. Sometimes they had quarrels amongst each other. The only thing different from humans, perhaps, was that they were immortal and had some special magical powers which differed from god to god. But other than that, they were kind of immature. They were, this is picture with the multiple Greek gods, starting from Jupiter, or Zeus, who is kind of like the chief god. And then there were gods of agriculture and sea and so on. So the whole group of gods. If you wanted to go on a sea voyage, you would have to talk to or pray to Poseidon, god of the. So the two names are the Greek and the Latin. The Romans came up with their own names, but they used the same gods. So those are the gods. There was a whole bunch of them. And like I said, they were not looked at as being ultimately good or just or anything. There are actually interesting questions which, as far back as Plato was asking about what is it about justice? Do gods actually love it or not? Is justice something gods love? We'll talk about it later. The perhaps most important poet of the time was Homer. And many people back then learned Homer from the very young age, and then that's how they knew how to behave in life. Xenophon, one of the philosophers, said, all at first have learned according to Homer. Now, whether Homer was actually one person or whether his works are kind of a collective work on multiple people is debated today. If you take more specific classes on the subject, you'll learn more about it. But for our purposes, it doesn't matter as much. There are certain works which are attributed to Homer, and those works were in existence back then. People read them. People really got impressed by them. Homeric poems, the most important ones are Iliad and Odyssey. They were passed on by people called rhapsodes. The rhapsodes were professional retellers of those poems. They would just learn all of them, and then they would go to festivals and different events and just recite it from memory. Homer poems influenced both modes of thought of the people and argument characteristic of later philosophical thought, particularly ethical and moral values. What is the most important thing in life? How should you behave in life? That's where people were getting it from. This is the fragment of a Greek vase, slaying of Hector. See, there's two Greek warriors fighting. One of them was Hector, the other one was Achilles, and that is one of the scenes from Iliad. You read the Iliad, it's in there, and it's an important part of it. So this is something which people really took very seriously. And as a result of that, their moral ideal was an ideal of the warrior. Excellence was defined as, first of all, success, honor, power, wealth, moderation, security, courage, loyalty, and patriotism. Like a good soldier, right? That's the what the good soldier has, and this is how people thought everybody should live. Even though it seems like it is more suitable for people of noble birth, right? People who were leaders of society. It's kind of hard to imagine a simple peasant having these kind of values. Nonetheless, those were the values. And at the time, in fact, they didn't care very much about the simple people. Simple people didn't even take part in the democracy until later into the story. When democracy began in ancient Greece, only the wealthy, the people who had enough money, could participate and elect their leaders and so on. And of course, no women, unfortunately. Okay, so now we're getting to actual philosophy, because poetry still really is not a philosophy. What exactly is philosophy? We'll get a little bit of an idea now. But when did it begin? When did what we call philosophy really begin? It depends on the definition, obviously, but there is a date, there is a specific date which philosophers like to mention. And this date is 585 BC. 585 BC. What happened in this date? The philosopher Thales predicted a solar eclipse. Now, first of all, let me ask you, I'm not sure how much you guys know about timeline. We are now, just to explain it, just in case if somebody doesn't know, we are now in the year 2026, right? Why? What are we counting it from? Why is it 2026 and not like 1000? Yeah.
I think AD, like when Christ was born.
Birth of Christ. AD Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So supposedly there is a year when the Christ was born, which is year 1. There's no year 0. That actually is wrong, because even historians say that the historical Christ was not born in that year. They got it wrong. It will happen somewhat earlier. But since they determined that, and that was many, many centuries ago, we started counting it this way. Greeks were not counting it. They didn't even know about Christ. But we can still kind of put it into our scale. It's just that since it was before that, we're counting backwards here. So the years before Christ go backwards, right? So if we now go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2026, when we go before that, they are usually called BCE, before Common Era, and it goes 1, 2, 3. So the year 585 would be 585 years before Christ was born, or if you do the math, 2,611 years ago. So that's the date. So keep in mind, until we make it to the birth of Christ, which we will in a couple of weeks, we are counting backwards. We're going years from the bigger ones to the smaller ones. Obviously, they didn't count it this way. They would be surprised if they find out. But since we're putting it into our own time scale, we have to do it this way. So that's what happened. Actually, did it really happen or not? there is some debate about that. Thales is a very mysterious figure. Now, when we talk about Thales and talk about first philosophers, we, like I said, we'll talk about Lydia and the city of Miletus. They are called Milesians because they lived in that part right here. And today it is Turkey, sorry, it's not Greece. It's the coast of Turkey. And there's like some remnants of this area. But back then, there were Greek people there. And this is where Thales lived and several first philosophers. They sometimes are called Ionians, sometimes Milesians. Doesn't matter because this part is Ionia, part of Lydia, Ionia, and then Miletus is the city. We also call this first period, which will start with cosmological, because they were mainly concerned with cosmological issues. Not only cosmological, but mainly cosmological. And it starts at 585 BCE and then until roughly middle of the 5th century BCE. Middle of the 5th century would be around the year 450 BCE, which is still before Christ. It's all before Christ. The questions they were concerned with are what is fundamentally real and why does change happen? There's a lot of interesting issues here which are still with us today. But what was different? The rational approach. They were not doing what the poets were doing. The poets were simply passing on the stories. So if you wanted to know something, according to the poets, you should just learn what your forefathers said about it. And if your forefathers said that lightning happens because one of the gods was angry and threw a thunderbolt, that's exactly what you should believe. But if you approach it rationally, does it make sense? No, because you may wonder like, okay, they were smart people before me, right? But could they be wrong? Yeah, just because they lived before me doesn't mean they had everything right. So rationally, you should dig a little deeper. You should try to find out, like, is this really how things are? And this is what first philosophers started doing. They were not completely abandoning these old ways, but they were still using a lot more to dig into these issues. And we will actually use several Greek words because it's the best way to understand Greek philosophy is to use Greek language. The Greek language is significantly different from English language. In fact, if you ever studied this period at like Harvard or Oxford, you would see that you would have to first learn the Greek language and then you would be reading it in the original Greek, because there's so many differences with English. When they translate it, they rub off a lot of important detail. But certain Greek words are important to understand, and we will also have to understand. One of them is cosmos. We use this word today. It is a Greek word. But what does it mean? It means order or systematic whole. In fact, it was used even in the Iliad that actually talks, when they talk about the way soldiers are in battle, they say they are kosmoi, meaning they are in orderly formation. So that's literally what this word means. It means some sort of order or organized formation. When you started talking about the universe, that was one of the first things they started to wonder. Is there some order to it? Or is it just some random stuff? Because if you look at the sky at night, does it look orderly to you? Well, at first it doesn't, right? There's just a bunch of random stars. Doesn't seem. But then if you look a little bit more carefully, you notice that there are some regularities about it, right? One of the regularities is the whole thing kind of spins around, but it stays in the same type of kind of way, and it changes from the season to season, as we now know, because the Earth is circling and so on. They didn't know that, but they still noticed that there's some order to that. And they tried to figure out what is this order. So, coming back to our friend Thales, he was one of so-called physikoi. Physikoi were wondering about nature, and this is where the word physics come from. In Greek, physis just means nature, a nature of something, and wondering how did word begin. Another word I actually skipped here is arche. Arche is another important word. They were wondering what is the origin of everything. But in Greek, archaea has two different meanings. It's an origin, and it also is the fundamental part of something, what something is made of. Right? So they were wondering what is everything made of, and that, in the same time, to them also meant what is the origin of it? Where did it come from? Okay, so what answers did they find? Let's first of all look at what we know about Thales from historical source. It's always the best idea to look at the sources. Herodotus, who is one of the Greek historians living at the time, a couple of centuries after actually Thales, but still a lot closer to him than we are, said this. He was talking about the battle. He said, as they were having equal success in the war, it happened that in the 6th year, when a battle was being fought, the day suddenly became night. Solar eclipse. Thales of Miletus has foretold to the Ionians that this loss of daylight would occur, setting as the limit the very year in which the event occurred. So this is a translation from Greek. This is the exact testimony we have from Herodotus. What do you think about it? Yeah.
I feel like back then that would have been like a little bit. Obviously today it's like, oh, commonplace. Like we line this up, we know where it's gonna be. But if somebody made that prediction, they'd be like crazy, and then it happens, and then they're not crazy.
So could you do it? That's one question. Like from the modern point of view, we now know a lot about the way the universe works. We have good observation, so we can predict solar eclipses, and we do. And they tell you like it will happen in this year, so you can even where it will be best visible, you can travel to. Like recently there was one in Europe. We didn't see much of it, but if you wanted to see it, you should have gone to at least Iceland. It was in the news. I don't know if you guys followed it. So we know ahead of time. But back then, how the hell did he do it? Could he have relied on poetry? No, obviously not. Yeah.
He must have paid attention to the patterns somehow. There was something.
Observation,
something written in the
yes.
stars that said that this would happen.
Observation, and then using logic, using your rational approach, he was able to say, okay, looks like it will happen in this year. He clearly did not predict the day, it was impossible, but he predicted the year. He said, in that year, the sun will be covered. And at the time, of course, people were looking at him like, yeah, right. How do you know? And then, boom, it happened. And everybody was shocked. And they were like, wait a minute. This guy Thales, he said it will happen. So that was very impressive for the period. And this is where we consider philosophy began, because note that the difference here. They no longer just passed on what they heard from the poets or from the fathers. Your own rational approach. The moment when you say, okay, this is all cool, but I want to know for myself. Let me use my reason, take a look at it, and figure it out. This is where science will begin. This is where everything will begin. So that's the date, and there are several of those so-called Milesian philosophers. Thales was the first one. We know the least about him because none of his work survived. Not a single word survived. All we know is from people who lived at the time, mainly actually from Aristotle. Aristotle did write something about Thales. Whether he read his work or not, hard to say, and he lived several centuries later. And back then, they were not keeping records very well. So it's kind of hard to say how much even Aristotle knew. But this is what we know. Several things he supposedly believed. Movement is caused by the soul. There is a soul, obviously, in human beings, which moves human beings. But he also noticed that they're magnets. They had magnets at the time. Can magnet move things? Yeah. So Thales supposedly suggested that magnet has soul too. So it's not just humans that have soul, but anything which can move things has soul. Then he also suggested that Earth rests on water, and in fact, the world is made of water. It may seem surprising to us. They were all wondering about this arche, so he thought arche was water. In other words, everything is made of water. Does it make any sense? Let's think about it rationally without using physics, which we know today. Suppose you didn't know anything. Does it make sense that everything is made of water? No? You don't think it makes any sense? If you pick yourself with a needle or something, what will come out? Blood. In fact, many pretty hard objects you can squeeze so hard that some sort of liquid will come out of them. There are, of course, stones which you really can't do it to, but is it because there's no water, or is it because you're just not strong enough? Well, Thales apparently thought that it's just you're not strong enough. If you were strong enough, you could probably squeeze it out of stone too. But so many things which are softer, which can be squeezed and the water comes out of them, that it makes some kind of sense to suggest that perhaps there is water in everything. Especially in terms of humans, because not only water comes out of us literally, but we can't live without water. How long can you survive without water? Yeah, few days. That's it. A lot less than without food. Without food, you can go on for a couple of months. Without water, no. We need water all the time. I'm getting thirsty right now, and I've only been talking for like 30 minutes. So he thought everything is made of water. Okay, so arche to him was water. Water is what underlies all things. Aristotle tells us this. Whether we believe him or not, he may have somewhat distorted it, but nonetheless, that is what supposedly Thales was saying. Nothing else is known here. The next one, the next philosopher, pre-Socratic philosopher, who is also Ionian from the same area, was supposedly his student, Anaximander. Anaximander lived 610 to 545 BC, so he was alive during this solar eclipse thing too, and he was a student. We already have a little bit of what is called testimonia. In other words, these are fragments of his work retold to us by some historians who lived at the period, in particular Aristotle. So here's what Aristotle says. For some make the infinite, or apeiron as it is in Greece, this, namely something aside from the elements, rather than air or water, so that others are not destroyed by one of them, but is infinite. So he disagreed with his teacher, as frequently happens, right? He said it's not water, can't be water. He said it is apeiron. Apeiron in Greek just means something which is unlimited. Some stuff, in other words. So everything is made of some stuff, but it's not water. That was his theory. They contain a position with regard to one another. For example, air is cold, water is wet, fire is hot. If any one of them were infinite, the rest would already have been destroyed. So he asked this question, right? This is like, I don't think he did any experiment, but you can say it's a mental experiment. Like if everything was made of water, but fire destroys water, water falls down, disappears. Can fire be made of water? That makes no sense, right? So everything has to be made of something else. That was his idea. Apeiron, indefinite, or the stuff, it doesn't have arche, but everything is made of this apeiron. It is deathless and indestructible. And he suggested another interesting thing, and this is like a long time ago, right? He said the earth actually rests on nothing. Thales thought it was on water. He thought, no, it doesn't have to be. It's an interesting theory. This is roughly what he thought the universe looks like. Let's take a look at it. The earth is at the middle. Look at its shape. Why is it shaped like this? Well, obviously they thought if it's round, everything will fall off. So it can't be round. But if it's in the middle, it has to have some kind of shape. So this is the shape. It's like a hockey puck. We're walking here on top of it. But it is in the middle. It's not on anything. And the theory was kind of like this. if you have a donkey, right, and on one side equal distant it has a carrot, on the other side it has something else like cabbage, I don't know, which way donkey will go? Well, if they're equal distant and if desire is equal, the donkey may not go anywhere. It would be torn, right? So this is the idea about the earth being in the middle of everything, and so it doesn't kind of fall anywhere because it's in the middle. It doesn't have to be on top of water or anything else. So that's actually fairly interesting, and I would say even rather modern theory, because that's basically what we think now. It doesn't rest on anything, right? It is circling, but nonetheless it's not sitting on something. Yeah?
So you believe the Earth, everything orbits the Earth? Is what he believed?
That's the next thing, yes. He thought that stars are next circle because he thought they are closer. Then there is a moon, and then there is a sun, and they are indeed circling the Earth. So that is, like I said, fairly advanced theory for the time. Later they will come up with other theories. We will see how it will evolve a lot, because almost any philosopher at the time would come up with his own theory. Why? Because they didn't want to repeat somebody else. They wanted to come up with some original explanation. And it will lead very quickly to people mistrusting philosophers, but we'll talk about it next week. Nonetheless, this was based on reason and not on the stories, because the stories, the poems which they were passing on didn't say anything like this. But clearly this guy was using his reason. He was asking, well, the stories tell us one thing, but does it make sense? Perhaps things are like that. That makes more sense to me. And he had some interesting things to say about justice. We'll come back to justice next time, because that's still a very important issue for us today. Note what he was saying. The things that perish into the things from which they came to be according to necessity, for they pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice in accordance with the ordering of time. A little bit of a weird language, but what do you think he's trying to say? What's his idea of justice? So he's not talking about people here. He's talking about things. But what is he saying? Yeah.
I think he's saying that everything needs to balance out.
Yeah, like if it's not in balance, if it encroaches on something else, it's injustice. And justice then is what? Having it all leveled up. That's the idea. What do you think about this idea? Do you think this is what justice is? Yeah.
I think this is kind of an early interpretation of karma. I would say he's just saying justice, everyone gets what.
Well, karma is related to this, right? Yeah. Like if you do something bad, then something bad will happen to you. But you can apply it to things we are talking about today, like the question, why do some people have so much money? Shouldn't we all have the same amount? Isn't that justice? Right? We still think about it this way. Why some people are poor and some people are billionaires? Shouldn't we at least a little bit closer? Maybe not exactly the same, but some people actually said exactly. There were actually people, revolutionaries, who said, no, everybody should have exactly the same. One pair of pants, one car, whatever. If you have more than that, then that's no good. Yeah, so that's basically what most people think when they say socialism. The idea of everybody having equal amount, equal share of the resources of their society. Which of course then raises another question, right? Do we all deserve equal share, or some of us deserve more? Should we really equalize it? That will be important for them, and it's still important for us. And this is a big part of philosophy, so we'll come back to it when we talk about it next time. Because many people, even back then, disagreed with that. But this idea is still with us today, and it still is important for us today. And then the last of the three is probably less interesting, Anaximenes. Anaximenes was a student of Anaximander. He lived a little bit later, and he disagreed with his teacher too. He thought actually it's not apeiron. He thought air, or pneuma, as they called it, is the most fundamental element. Everything is made of air. Why? Well, it's very pervasive. It's like inside everything. It can go inside objects. So again, if you really squeeze something hard, you probably can find air in there. Not everything can be squeezed that hard, but nonetheless, and he even tried to perform the first experiment with blowing on his hand. So rarefaction and condensation type thing. He thought that if you blow on your hand like this, it's hot. But if you blow like this, it's cold. Why? Because if you blow like this, you condense the hair with your mouth and it becomes more condensed. Is this what's happening? What is the actual explanation why the air is more warm when you go? What do you think? Yeah.
Pressure. Like when you do, it's like more pressure. So that
That's what he thought, but is it the pressure? Or is it just because it's hot inside your body and when you go slowly like this, it goes right from inside, but if you blow very quickly, that's just the air in your mouth rather than internal air. Anyway, but that was an experiment. He tried to do something and like figure it out. They were naive in many ways. Nonetheless, they were important. They were important because they draw this line. They no longer just listen to the stories, to myths. They tried to use their own mind. As we will see, once you start using your own mind, things get very complicated. They'll be getting more and more complicated all the time. But you can still achieve something. And hopefully we did achieve plenty of things, right? If you look at the way society is today, we may not know any better about justice, but at least we have some cool stuff, right? We have some comforts, which they didn't have. We can get from place to place very quickly on an airplane or a car. We can create air conditioning, right? Isn't it the coolest thing? Almost anywhere, even in Greece, it did get pretty hot sometimes. And they couldn't possibly live in places like Las Vegas because combust. But nonetheless, they lived in some less pleasant territories and the temperature was fluctuating. So without air conditioning, it was probably not very comfortable. But now we have all those stuff because we approached it rationally, because we discovered all these things. But as we will also see, on many issues, we are no better than they were. And justice would be one of them. They did develop democracy. Democracy goes back to ancient Greece, demos kratos, power of the people, the first government. We still have democracy, but they had problems with it. And guess what? We have problems with it too. It's not perfect. As Churchill said, it's probably one of the worst ways to run the government, but the best one of the ones we know. So we'll talk about what Plato and Aristotle thought about democracy, what they thought about the composition of the state, justice, and so on. And that will be bulk of the class. One more philosopher just to mention before we go. Xenophanes. Xenophanes is not considered one of the Ionians, but he is from Ionia. He actually was born in Miletus. So he is closely connected to them. But he left Ionia at the age of 25 and moved to a different part of what back then was Greek world, Sicily. Sicily is now part of Italy, right? It's an island at the bottom of Italy, but this entire southern Italy was also Greek back then. He moved there, and that part will become very important when we come back on Wednesday and talk about what was happening with philosophy in this part. It is very, very different from Ionians. It's a very different school of philosophy, and it will go somewhat of a different way. But he is kind of a transitionary figure. And he was a poet himself. He actually wrote a lot of poems, but he was also a philosopher. Some of the things he was talking about is the religion. He did write quite a bit about religion. Here's the long quote, which is very interesting for us. Let's take a look at it. Both Homer and Hesiod, another important poet, have ascribed to the gods all deeds which among men are matters of reproach and blame. Thieving, adultery, deceiving one another. Remember, this is what Greeks thought gods were doing. Mortals believe that the gods are born and have human clothing, voice, and bodily form. Ethiopians say their gods are snub-nosed and black. Thracians that theirs are blue-eyed and red-haired. But if oxen or horses or lions had hands or were able to draw with their hands and accomplish the same work as men, horses would draw the figures of gods resembling horses, and oxen resembling oxen. And each would make the gods' bodies the same bodily form as they themselves had. So what is he saying here? Yeah.
That their image of what the gods are may not necessarily be true, because if you think as a cow, then or like he's saying a horse or an oxen, then obviously they're going to think that their gods look like them. So it's a narrow viewpoint.
Exactly. He already realized that this is what we today call anthropomorphic. We are making gods like humans. We're thinking of them as human. Even today, there is a strong tendency to think of God as some grandpa, right? Grandpa sitting there on a cloud. But he was not an atheist. And he actually did say something which is interesting about God. He said, there's only one God. God is one, greatest among gods and men. Not at all like mortals in bodily form of thought. All of him sees, all of him thinks, all of him hears. But without effort, he shakes all things by the thought of his mind. So that's already a progress in terms of what exactly the idea of God is. And we will see that Plato will further develop it. And this is all before Christianity. Nonetheless, the Jews already had this idea of monotheism, but the Greeks developed their own ideas about that, which are very interesting and very important for us. Okay, yeah, that is all the time for today. So for Wednesday, I encourage you to get the book and read the first chapter, and I will also post, it actually is already there, there's a folder called Readings in Files, the reading from Heraclitus. Very interesting. Heraclitus is a fantastic figure. So please make sure to read it, because we'll discuss it next time. It's several pages. I did upload it there, so you don't have to buy it or anything. Just as a spoiler, when we write the paper, it will be based on those readings. So you should read at least one of them for sure. But I encourage you to read all of them. Okay, so that's all for today. See you guys on Wednesday.